in speech and a Class B teaching certificate in English and language arts, a Doctor of Jurisprudence from the Jones School of Law at Faulkner University, and a Master's of Public Administration from AUM as well. From 1975 through 2000, she was employed by the Alabama Criminal Justice Information Center in Montgomery. During this time, she wrote grants and brought millions of dollars to the state, and it allowed for Alabama to be one of the first states to have digital fingerprinting within county and local police forces. In 2000, Governor Doug Siegelman named her the Executive Director of Law Enforcement Systems Integration and Standards Board. And in 2002, after 27 years of service, she retired, and after a brief practice in law, she began teaching as a second career. She has taught undergraduate courses at Huntington College, South University, and has been an instructor in both Bachelor and Master of Criminal Justice programs at Faulkner University. Therese has also taught American National Government to over 200 high school seniors in Elmore, Autauga, and Montgomery County public school systems through the dual enrollment program. She's also on the board of directors for the Institute of Criminal Justice Education and Aid to Inmate Mothers, which are Montgomery nonprofit organizations. She is a breast cancer survivor, and she has also donated a kidney to her brother. And with that, I introduce Therese Ford.
Well, you ended with the kidney. I do believe in giving back, so I guess. Again, my name is Therese Ford, and I am running for Congress in the 2nd Congressional District. The current congressperson from the 2nd Congressional District is Martha Roby. She is a Republican. I am a Democrat running for that seat. And let me tell you a little bit about why I'm a Democrat, why you might want to be a Democrat or continue being one, or if you're deciding whether or not you want to be one. When you think about history, and I love history, so if you don't like, how many of y'all like history? I love it too. And if you don't know it, you're what? Forced to repeat it, right?
Exactly.
When you look at our country and how our country has grown, evolved through the centuries, and think about what government has done and how government has benefited we the people, because we are the government. Think of all the programs that have been started that have made us proud to be Americans. Say, I'm American. The values, the principles. We have Social Security that was intended to help elderly people be able to live their last years in dignity and not be poor and homeless. You have Medicare to help the elderly people feel comfortable about their health care needs. We have Medicaid to help people who don't have enough money to maybe be able to buy health insurance. We have the Voting Rights Act that codified our right to vote. We have the Civil Rights Act, and there's been several Civil Rights Acts that help people of color, that help women, that help a whole range of people be able to get jobs, be able to go to school. Pell Grants, Americans with Disabilities Act, big help to help people be able to get jobs, be able to go places that they need to go. The Family Medical Leave Act, which helps families and strengthens families by not having people have to quit their job and possibly lose health insurance because they have to take care of a sick family member. Who got all of those bills passed? Democrats did. Yes. Democrats pushed those through Congress, and Democratic presidents signed those laws. Just want y'all to keep that in mind. And there's a whole list of other laws that probably I'm blanking out. If any of you know of any that you want to talk about, let me know. But I think that that's a good starting point to let us see and feel where we've come from as Democrats. And that we have every right to be proud. We don't need to be being called names, right? We don't need people making fun of us because we want to help people and make our country stronger. So, I mean, I'm just trying to lay that little groundwork for you. I have had lots of people ask me why I'm running as a Democrat. And I tell them, because I am a Democrat. I mean, that's a simple answer to a question, that people are asking. And I guess they're asking the question because Alabama is considered a red state. But even though we have red states, we have pockets within those states that aren't necessarily 100% red. And one of the things that we have to do is look and see what we've done in the past, what we still need to do in the future. And at the same time, we have to stop people from destroying what we've already accomplished. How many of y'all read in the newspaper about the new budget that's just been introduced? Paul Ryan, a Republican from Wisconsin, just introduced his second budget, the one he introduced last year, passed the House of Representatives. Every Republican in the House voted for it except for 4. And I'm assuming those 4 came from either Arizona and Florida, where you have a lot of elderly people. Because Paul Ryan and the Republicans are intent on destroying Medicare as we know it. They want to cut spending for Medicare. They don't want to do anything about the cost of Medicare. They just want to cut spending on it. So what happens when you cut spending on a program that the cost is going to keep going up? Who makes up that difference? Want to guess? If you're on Medicare and the government says, I'm going to give you this much money for you to buy health insurance, and that's all we're going to give you because this is all we're spending on Medicare because we don't have the money to take care of you the way that you were expecting us to. And so that you take your little voucher and you go to an insurance company and buy you some health insurance. And then you have to go to the doctor for surgery. And your insurance company says, well, you're kind of old and you have a history of this. We're only going to pay this percent of your surgery. You'll have that tumor removed. So it's going to cost you $17,000. That's the cost of the surgery and the hospital stay. Who's going to have to pay that? You are, that's right. You you are, or your family, or you're gonna have to go somewhere and beg for donations. So be careful when they talk about cutting spending. All of the programs that they want to cut spending are programs that help people. Okay? They want to cut Medicare. They want to cut Medicaid. They want to turn it into a block grant and allow the states to spend the money how they want to. Now, you live in Alabama. How do you think Alabama's going to spend the block grant?
Do it when they do everything else, I'll put it in the general fund, pay for everything else.
That's what they'll do, exactly. And so people won't be able to be treated for whatever that they need the treatment for. And already Alabama is not the best state to need Medicaid anyway. We have very stringent requirements. You already have to have cancer. They don't do any preventive care. You have to already be pregnant, and then they will cover pregnancies. And then you're off of it as soon as you have your baby, and your child can be on Medicaid. Most Medicaid recipients in Alabama are children and elderly people in nursing homes. Everybody else, you have to fend for yourself. They want to cut the food stamps. They want to cut the WIC program, which provides milk and food products for young children up till, I think, age 5, if I'm not mistaken. And again, that's a program that I didn't mention that was started by Democrat Jimmy Carter. So there's all these programs that they're wanting to cut. But a lot of the programs that they're wanting to cut, look at what they're saying. They just want to cut spending, what the government spends. They're not going to cut any cost of anything. They're not going to cut the cost of milk. They're not going to cut the cost of health care. They're just going to expect us to pay the difference. I don't know about you. That's not right. How many of y'all have a job? Any of y'all have jobs? And they're taking money out of your FICA, out of your Social Security and Medicare? You're already paying for Medicare. You're already paying for it. And then they're going to wait till you get a little older, and then they're going to go, oh, you know all that money we've been taking from you. Now you got to add a lot more to it to get any kind of health care treatment. If you think that's okay, then you can support the Paul Ryan budget. And you can support the Republicans in Congress, because they're all going to vote for it again. Maybe those same 4 people won't, but they will. The only thing that kept the first Paul Ryan budget from passing and going to the president's desk was the Senate. The Senate has a rule they can't filibuster budget laws. And they didn't have enough for a majority vote, so it died. Now they've got their new budget. Their new budget is going to cut taxes. 2 tax rates, 10% and 25%. Everybody hopes that they'll be in that 10% bracket, right? But nobody knows what bracket anybody will be in. And they're doing all of this saying that they would need to cut the budget deficit, which is really the debt that they're trying to cut. They're playing word games with us. And the Congressional Budget Office has done an analysis of the budget. And the debt shouldn't start going down until around 2040, I believe, is the date that they gave. So all the spending cuts aren't really going to help alleviate that $14 trillion debt. So why are they doing it? Why do you think they're doing
It's
it?
gotta go somewhere.
Do what?
The money has to go somewhere.
The money has to go somewhere, okay?
I don't know where it's going. It's not gonna contribute to that.
Well, part of it is that they're cutting taxes and not allowing any taxes at all to increase, even if they need to increase, even if they won't affect you, but affect another group of people, they're not allowing those taxes. And really just cutting discretionary spending is not at all the solution to trying to get rid of the $14 trillion debt. How many of you have any connection to the military? Anybody here a military brat? Oh. Nobody else is?
My father was reserves.
Okay. Anybody live near a military base? So I'm not in the military. My dad was retired from the military. But I live in Montgomery. And we have Maxwell Gunner in Montgomery. Chad over there lives in Daleville, right? Ozark? He lives by Fort Rucker. And he works at Fort Rucker. So what's the big deal about military spending?
They're not gonna cut military spending.
Do what?
They're not really gonna cut military spending.
They've already cut it. Maxwell and Gunner have already lost some jobs, and Fort Rucker has already lost some jobs. Troy has lost jobs through the helicopter plants. No, that's part of that defense spending, the cuts in spending. Why are we having to cut defense spending? Even though a lot of people think that defense spending is bloated, but why are we having to cut it?
There was a famous committee like last year that was supposed to get something done, and the idea was if they could not, then that there would be automatic cuts would be in effect. One of them, and half military and half discretionary, was that it?
And they'd already cut the discretionary a lot.
Yeah.
And so then these defense cuts come in. And I'll tell you, I mean, it's very selfish of me to talk about Maxwell Gunner. Because I'm not in the military. I can't shop on the base. But I own a house in Montgomery. And if that military base goes away, do you know what's going to happen to the property values in Montgomery? Yeah. Yes.
How much do you think that would affect the property values? If the
How much do I think it would affect? Right now, I'm sorry.
Like, about how much do you think it would affect the property values in Montgomery?
Maybe between $20,000 and $30,000.
And, I mean, $20,000, $30,000, like, for,
Housing is expensive in Montgomery.
yeah.
And
Montgomery.
it's expensive because there's so many military people coming in and out, and they get housing allowance.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, like, what would you say, would that be like 20% drop, or,
I would think so.
yeah?
Yeah. I mean, that's an educated guess, but yes, that's what I would think,
No.
that it would do that. And it would put a lot of people, what they call underwater, because we'd all be owing.
Right, like foreclosures and stuff.
And still making payments on a house that was 20, if not more, percent lower. You couldn't sell it for anywhere near what you owed on it. And I'm guessing the same is true for around Fort Rucker, right?
Yes, ma'am. You gotta remember, Fort Rooker, especially in the Wiregrass area, which Pike County is in the Wiregrass, but it's not really affected as much with Fort Rucker as Coffee County, Houston County, and Dale County. City of Enterprise, the majority of the housing in Enterprise is military housing. People that, you know, live on post or work on post and stuff like that. Ozark. If you had a significant drawdown in, say, student pilots coming in and just overall cut in defense, you would probably see roughly, I would guess, for the whole Wiregrass area, if they did a major cut in spending, locally, I would say anywhere from $500 million to $1 billion that we would lose in the Wiregrass area. So far as, you know, people coming to shop. Enterprise, Ozark, Dothan would see a significant decrease in population, incomes, and all that. Enterprise would virtually dry up.
So like, I mean, you're saying like $500 million to $1 billion, like what percentage of the economy is that down here?
Oh, that, what, Fort, and I can't speak for Maxwell,
Yeah.
but for Fort Rucker, the local economy, it's the driving force. I mean, whenever you see on TV about the mayors and stuff, they're always going, I watch WTVY Dothan. I'm from Ozark, so we do Dothan, we don't do a lot of WSFA. But WTVY, they're all the time, the mayors from local, you know, like I said, Enterprise, Dothan, Ozark, going to Montgomery, or going to either Montgomery or Washington to try to stave off any kind of cuts, because they know how vital it is for the local area, so far as taxes and stuff like that. Because for every dollar that the defense puts into Fort Rucker, you're reaping so many dollars more out of the local economy.
Probably $6 to $10 more for each
Yes.
dollar the government spends.
Wait, about how much?
I would just make a guess, anywhere between $6 and $10, that might be.
Per dollar spent?
Per dollar spent, yeah. I mean, it's a good investment, is what we're
Yeah.
saying in Alabama. And both of those bases, and I say Maxwell Gunner, we have Gunner on one side of town, and Maxwell is on the other side of town. And Gunner does a lot of contract work with engineers and programming and things like that. And they pretty much kind of combined with Maxwell/Gunner. And I mean, it would be devastating to the state to lose either one of those military bases, but to have both of them cut would be really, really bad.
Just on, I work at AFS, Army Police Support, and I'm a mechanic out there, and aircraft mechanic. And just on our contract, we deal with the maintenance of all the Army helicopters. We have 32 to 33,000, no, 3,200 to 3,300 people just on our contract, just do maintenance. That's not counting the soldiers, that's not counting all the other contractors and all the contract work that they're doing on post. They're steady building buildings and stuff like that. If they cut all that, reduce military, reduce the flight hours, you're getting less flight students coming in, less need for materials, and I mean, it's a big contributing factor. And Maxwell's probably the exact same way. So you have a lot of money going in forward, but you have a lot of money going out.
And the reason I'm bringing that up is because the members of Congress are the ones who have to deal with the administration and with the BRAC Commission to make sure that those bases stay open. And right now, we have a very, very contentious relationship between Democrats and Republicans in Congress, and in other places too, but especially in Congress. And you have people who cannot or will not talked with anybody on the other side. And that's bad for Alabama. That's bad for our military bases. And so I think that a lot of people need to think when they vote, think their best interests, even if that means your own pocketbook, because I promise you, other people are thinking their pocketbook. These millionaires, these big oil companies, all these people that are funding all these super PACs, they're thinking their economic interests. I have worked my whole life with the state. I have had to negotiate. I have had to deal with Washington, D.C. I had to work with the FBI. It's something that I can do. I don't have a problem talking with Republicans. I'm from Alabama. Most of the people I know are Republicans. But at the same time, it would be easy enough for me to talk to Democrats who have powerful positions in Washington also. And I think that's something that we need to look at here in Alabama when we put all of our eggs in the Republican basket. I mean, this isn't like a football game. Are you okay if my team won? Yeah, hey, my team's better than your team. At the end of the day, so what? Politics is a little bit different from that. And it, a lot of times, is very, very important who wins. More than just, yay, my political party won. So I'm wanting you to think, I'm wanting you to talk to other people, see what all you can find out. You don't have to believe everything that I'm saying. Check it out. And also know what you're talking about when you talk to other people. Don't just quote talking points.
Don't listen to Fox News all the time.
Last time, if I could interject here,
Sure.
last time we got together a couple of weeks ago, our speaker was Joel Williams, who's run for office down here in the South. You're going to meet him at the Kiwanis, the later one. And he gave, I thought was just, we only had about half as many people here as that day as here. But his attitude is more or less going back to Ronald Reagan, say you're entitled to your own opinion, but not your own facts. This man is a professor of business economics. He knows the whole history of debt and deficit and the difference between the two, and under which presidents, and which president has gone high. And he could go to the board. He went to the board and just drew and show it. It would fly in the face of so many people here who have always felt and had this crazy notion that somehow the Republicans were the party of economic certainty, shall we say, and then we know, of course, these people here were pretty much in daycare during the 90s. I mean,
Yeah,
I've got nothing against you. I'm not saying you're retarded or anything. I'm saying you were like, you know, during that time, and they don't remember what great years we had, and that the last three presidents, I believe, who have had battle, as Joel pointed out, you know, Lyndon Johnson in his last year before Nixon took over. Carter, in spite of all the people throwing dirt at Carter, he did, and then of course Clinton, we had this great surplus. And I remember those years, and it was just absolutely, you know, it was so hard for them to take. And you hear, as you've been following this Clown Express on the Republican side of the campaigning for president, Mr. Gingrich always talking about, well, you know, I worked with Bill Clinton, and we did all this and that, as if everything started to get better when he became Speaker of the House. Sorry about that. I mean, I have a calendar too. The calendar was read 1995 when he became Speaker. In 1993, Bill Clinton put through a stimulus package that did not get one Democrat, one Republican vote. In fact, it didn't get all the Democrats, even in the House. It passed by one vote in the Senate, and there was a lady in Pennsylvania, a wonderful congresswoman, she voted for it, and she was taken out in the next election because of that. And when that happened, the Republicans, you'd think this is like Armageddon. It's all over, folks. The world is going to come to an end because of what you just did. And in point of fact, it was that, with the changes, with the shifting of the tax rates up to the 36 to 39, all of that is what got everything going. Gingrich was just fortunate to come along after the machine was already in motion. He makes it sound as if he was the one that started it. That's not true. It's absolutely not, it's historically demonstrable, you know. It was the 1993, late 1993 budget stimulus package that got everything launched. Now, I would give, you know, I give credit where credit is due. They did work on some things together and workfare over and welfare. There were some good things there. But I've never seen falsification is what I hear anytime I turn on to, well, I mean, in my house, you know, I have one of those little buttons you can't turn to Fox News. Because purely, with the exception maybe of Shepard Smith, and a couple of people like that who are more or less news reporters, it is the most incredible amount of propaganda. It's just like, I can't believe it.
Well, one thing that's interesting, if you read the actual Constitution, not any of the amendments, but the actual Constitution, there's a provision in the original document that said that the United States government would pay for all the war debts. 12 years after the Revolutionary War, the country still owed $52 million. And it was states that owed most of that, states and individuals that owed that money. Because the federal government, remember the Articles of Confederation, they couldn't tax. And there's a provision in there that, you know, hey states, if you ratify this Constitution, we'll pay off the war debt so that we can get business started, so that we can start trading with foreign countries. How many of y'all know somebody who's, hey man, can I have $1? Can I have $5? Anybody know any people like that? And I'll pay you back next week, I'll pay you back next week. After a while, what do? You don't have $5 anymore, right? Wink, wink, wink. Because you're not getting paid back. Well, countries are the same way. And that's what the United States was finding out. 12 years out, they couldn't trade with any other foreign country because they kept saying, when are you going to pay us back our money? $52 million was a lot of money back then. And if you want to call that a stimulus or a bailout, I guess you can. But it's also written into the Constitution that they would pay off the debts. And they did. And started this country onto its path of greatness. Another thing I want to talk about, Martha Roby is pushing this piece of legislation. She's saying that Jeff Sessions, who is from y'all's neck of the woods, he is, in the Senate, introduced this bill. It's some sort of truth in budgeting bill. And Martha Roby has introduced it in the House. And this bill is something that they both seem to be very proud of. And they're wanting to get rid of gimmicks in budgeting. Now, one of the gimmicks, or one of the issues that they call a gimmick, is disaster aid. Yeah. This is, y'all just had a tornado, right, last week?
Right here in this area.
Yes.
Jeff Sessions is from Mobile, you should know better about hurricanes.
I know it, that's why I'm saying I think it's despicable that we have two people from Alabama, that a lot of people have nicknamed Alabama Tornado Alley. We have floods. I mean, Elba has had floods, I don't know how many times. When I worked for the state, I was doing a training class in Geneva one time, and it started to rain. And they told me if I wanted to spend the night back in Montgomery, I was going to have to leave them because roads washed out. Yeah. We had last year was a horrible year for the state of Alabama. We had 270 tornadoes touched down. 250 people died. And billions of dollars worth of damage. If anybody's been to Tuscaloosa lately, it looks really, really bad.
It's been almost a year.
Yeah. Now, what they're talking about, I don't know if any of you remember, if you were watching the news, after all of those storms, after Tuscaloosa, after Joplin, Missouri, North Carolina, and Virginia, had some horrible storms. that destroyed a lot of property and killed people. And Eric Cantor, who is the majority leader in the House of Representatives, who, by the way, is from Virginia, which was one of the states that needed disaster aid, he said, you know, we'll probably fund FEMA, but however much money we give FEMA, we're going to have to cut other parts of the budget that FEMA matters. This is after they've already cut the discretionary spending. And when he said that, not one Republican came up and said, wait a minute, my state needs disaster money. Not one. It was some Democrats and the media that gave him a hard time about that statement, and he finally backed down. So now what's happening is Jeff Sessions and Martha Roby are introducing legislation that are pretty much going to say disaster aid is a gimmick. We'll fund FEMA, and when FEMA runs out of money, too bad.
Under that logic, then, I guess the state of Louisiana would have had to deal with the monumental problem of Katrina. That's outrageous.
Well, I actually heard people who were taking the side of the Bush administration saying, well, that's a state issue. The state needs to be able to do that. They need to send their National Guard. But everything was over in Iraq. Most of their National Guardsmen were in Iraq, as were the equipment that they needed. It was over in Iraq.
We actually sent 4 Chinooks. I don't know if y'all know what Chinook is. It's a big twin rotor, the big heavy hauler, cargo. We actually sent 4 Chinooks from Knox Airfield to Louisiana to help, and that would have happened, and this bill would be back. Because it'd be, well, I'll tell you that, it might could happen if the Louisiana governor probably begged another governor, please, send, we'll pay for the fuel, we'll pay for the men coming, but please, it wouldn't be a federal thing, probably be a state thing if the law passed.
If you had people playing politics, that won't happen. That was part of the problem with New Orleans flooding anyway, is they had a Democratic governor. So, I mean, that's where it hurts. And we're all Americans. I mean, even if Tuscaloosa, where they caught the brunt of it, and then parts of Jefferson County, that horrible storm that went through. Even though that's not in the 2nd Congressional District, they're still Alabamians. I, for one, think it's really hard-hearted and cruel to be proposing some of these legislations, to be proposing these budgets. I don't know about you, but I want you to go home and Google the Paul Ryan budget. Google Martha Roby, whatever Google her, she's going to have that budget, that truth in budgeting, because she's really excited about that. They're going to do away with all the gimmicks. And they've actually called disaster aid a gimmick. So that's what I have to say. Y'all have any questions? Yes?
How long would you say would be like a good time frame to balance the budget?
What I have read says that the Bush tax cuts in 01 and 03 are causing 40% of the annual deficits each year. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that a good bit of that, maybe 35 to 40% of that deficit, or the debt, is actually caused by lack of revenues. The wars, 2 unfunded wars, contributed an awful lot to that. There's a lot of people wanting us to just leave Afghanistan right now because of all the other problems that are going on with Afghanistan, and that we're not able to solve or really help a lot of that. and that might cut back on some of the money. But most people say the biggest contributors to that debt is the Bush tax cuts, the 2 wars that were unfunded. And I mean, they didn't raise taxes. The first time in American history that no taxes were ever raised when we were fighting a war. And then the prescription D for Medicare, which is the pharmaceutical, the copay, the Part D. And that was written, and it wasn't funded, and it also was not, it did not allow the Medicare agency to negotiate for pharmaceutical costs, for costs of medicine, like the VA does and like Medicaid does. And those are 2 of the things that keep the cost of those 2 health programs lower than Medicare. It's because Congress keeps tying the Medicare administrators' hands behind their backs, not letting them do a lot of the negotiating that they probably should be doing to save money.
So about how many years, like all those things
Oh.
considered?
It probably would get paid down a lot sooner if they were able to let the Bush tax cuts go away.
So, I mean, if we were able to do that, like, what would be a good time frame?
I honestly don't know, because you're talking about a lot of other things. Right now, Republicans in Congress are wanting to cut taxes for corporations and then they'll say and close loopholes, but they don't tell you which loopholes they're going to close.
Right.
Which probably means they're not going to close any, they're going to keep all of those built into the legislation.
Right, I mean, that's what I meant, like, if you were, like, gonna write a budget, if it was gonna be your budget, like, how
So it's
long?
going to be my budget?
Mhm.
I don't know, if they let the Bush tax cuts go, that'll probably start paying it down a whole lot faster than if they don't, if they extend those Bush tax cuts. But it's gonna take years, I mean, it's like $14 trillion.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, just to close to where we're not going into more debt every year, like, how long? I mean,
Well, right now, and that's what people are saying, they don't need to be cutting all this spending, because every time they cut spending in a program, somebody's losing a job over it. And somebody in the states is losing jobs. That's why we're laying teachers off now, is because they're cutting education programs at Washington. But the government is able to borrow money right now at anywhere between 0 and 1%. So that's an excellent interest rate.
Right.
And the government, even having our credit rating drop last summer, that's still a good rate to get. Greece
Right.
can't get that rate.
Right. Do you think it's good that our interest rates are low?
For people who are trying to buy houses and people who are trying to do things like that, yes. But for people who are trying to invest, no, because then they're not making enough money.
Right.
But you could probably come to a good medium, because I've actually been talking to some people about student loans. And there's lots of people graduating, and I may be talking to some of y'all right now. We're gonna graduate with, as soon as you walk across the stage, you owe maybe $40,000. That's a lot of money. And, when you try to go buy a house, and they say, well, let's run your credit. Got to get a credit report for you. And they see that you owe $40,000. You're going to have a hard time buying a house. Now, your parents need to get used to you being there a lot. And so, there needs to be some sort of approach so that you can either roll that over into a house, but you'd have to provide interest rates and things like that, and they'd have to be adjusted for that. But there needs to be some way to alleviate, to allow young people to start living their life.
Right, but do you see any long-term economic effects of low interest rates that could be detrimental?
The Fed is the one that generally deals with the interest rates, and their job is to counter inflation. And that's why they raise it, to keep too much money. But right now, banks aren't loaning money, and it's hard to get a loan right now. So it's probably fine that they're low right now. But they will have to go up eventually. probably the next couple of years.
Okay.
But that's what the Fed does, that's not what Congress does.
Right, yeah. But I mean, Congress like does have some oversight on the Fed, they just,
That they do, they're mostly is tax and spend policy, and the Fed is responsible for looking at interest rates and making sure that we don't have high inflation or deflation, and they're trying to keep everything on an even keel, which is hard to do, so.
right.
But to answer your question, I really don't know the answer, like how long it would take to pay off the debt. But yeah, interest rates will go up eventually.
Like, do you have an idea of like what would be a good goal to cut like in the first year you were in Congress? Like in terms of dollars, or like out of the you know, yearly deficit?
Well, I know that Republicans are trying to say we're gonna cut our way out of it. But they can't do that because there's not enough money to cut to you know, balance out and use that money on the debt. But, you know, there are programs that they can do, and I'm not saying there's not places that they can cut. But if you look at the programs that they're trying to cut, those are programs that are going to really, really hurt people. And being a Democrat, I mean, that's what the Dem and Democrat is. It's the People's Party. And, you know, Democrats don't try to hurt people. And that's, you know, Republicans say they're not either, but a lot of their policies do end up hurting people.
So like of the programs that are available to cut, like what do you think would be the best?
Well, I don't know. All I'm doing is looking at what they're trying to cut in their budget, and I'm saying that's not the best for right now because we're still in a jobless recession. There's a lot of people, even though you're looking at all of the factors saying, oh, well, we got out of the recession back in June of '09 or whatever. I think that's when they're saying we're out of it. But you try telling that to a lot of people who still can't find them a job, and they're still in a recession. And when you start trying to cut those programs, then that slows the economy. When you start cutting their unemployment benefits or cutting food stamps or cutting things like that, then that cuts stimulating the economy because they have to spend. You have to spend to keep the economy stimulated. And that was the whole idea behind the federal government having to borrow money to stimulate the economy, so that companies and businesses still had customers. And but to answer your question, I don't know. We'd have to look to see. But as a Democrat, I'm not going to look at trying to cut programs that hurt people. Maybe we could cut some subsidies to oil companies. Yes.
Would you work on actual, like, both, I know bipartisanship is important, but would you actually work with both Republicans and, of course, Democrats too, to actual get a budget passed, not this emergency spending that just keeps going on and on and on?
Try to, yeah. You know, one person, you know, can try all they want to, but yeah, that's what it takes. And I have worked with all sorts of people, like I said, my whole life. I worked for the state for 27 years and had to actually get people from public safety to turn over the driver's license pictures for our program. And if you think that was an easy task. They didn't want to give them up, but we finally got them. So, yes.
Okay, let's do this. Again, and I think you were the one that said it early on, we're talking about history, do we like it or not, and if we don't know it, we're condemned to repeat it. Okay, 1980, a bright young man by the name of David Stockman. He was Ronald Reagan's first, shall I say, financial manager of things. Came in with the brilliant notion of trickle down, and or as I sometimes call it, supply side. And after 2 years of that, the 1982 elections told Mr. Reagan that he was going to have to find some other thing to do because it was undercutting his presidency. So he fired Stockman, he got some other people in there, and finally we got a bit of cooperation. And then through the later 80s, even though, I mean, goodness knows he was spending plenty of money, but there was some investment at least involved in that. And, again, this is again, but it's like, these days, and I was really interested late, not too long ago, if you ever look at C-SPAN, now this is a pretty good thing to look at because it's pretty straight down the middle and they have people from different sides. David Stockman today, got gray hair, he's not the fair haired guy back then. David Stockman now says, that was all a bunch of economics, essentially. That was just crazy. No, it made no sense at all. Another thing you brought up, I can just add one more thing, and that is the Bush tax cuts. If you recall, at the end of the, in November 2010, that's the time that Democrats like to really forget about that particular the most recent off-year election. Following that, I think President Obama, in an effort to try to promote a certain amount of collegiality, maybe getting some cooperation from Republicans, he did what? He allowed the to go forward, to continue like that. When, the betting odds would have been maybe you wouldn't. I don't think that will happen again. That will come up in December between the election and the beginning of the new term, whoever's going to be president. And so I think whatever the result of the presidency is, Obama would veto any attempt. That's not going to happen. So then it would depend if we had a Republican president. That's why the Senate is very important. What happens in the Senate, where that they not get control there, because you could just we'll never get back to decent management again. I think that worries me very much.
But to answer your question, I don't know how long it would take. I know that if you look at different budgets that have been introduced, Barack Obama has also introduced 2 budgets. Same amount of time that Paul Ryan has introduced his budgets. And of course, his budgets won't go anywhere because they won't even consider those. Yet the Congressional Budget Office says that his budgets, which include tax increases as well as cuts, would lower the deficit in about a little over a decade, where it would be a considerable decrease in the debt.
And would allow infrastructure development too, which is
Yes.
critical. That was one of the great glories of the Clinton years. We did that. And Republicans have done it too. Eisenhower with the international highway system. And that was a Republican idea there. It's good for everybody. You don't have those kind of Republicans anymore. They're not that focused on what really works.
And that infrastructure is important because they're also trying